Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2613 of The Tom Woods Show, which we are recording on board the Tom Woods cruise with all these wonderful people. Of course, I've got on my official Tom Woods cruise shirt designed by Steve Rampton. A great guy. If you like fun artwork like this, caricaturesbysteve.com. He's a great guy. And I have with me the great Clifton Duncan, who's going to be putting on a concert for us on this very cruise. Great man. So many great things to say about Clifton. As you may know the story, but I first saw Clifton before I ever actually met him. I saw him on stage a couple of times. And then when a guest on the Tom Woods Show, he mentioned a play he'd been in, and I immediately realized I had seen him before. And holy cow, what an amazing happenstance that our paths would cross like this. But I'm really glad to have you here. Thank you. Thanks so much for being on board.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tom.
You know, last time you were on, at the end of the episode, I said, and you know, Clifton's going to be on with the Tom Woods cruise with me. And you said something like, yeah, I'm going to have to talk to you about that after the show. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Clifton, no, don't tell me. But here he is. So thank goodness. So I think a lot of us know Clifton's story, but you have a fairly elite acting background. Mm-hmm. So it is not boasting for you to just tell us the facts about your background.
Oh, gosh. I got into acting and into theater the way that most straight guys do, which is that I followed some girl into drama class. And, I found that I had an aptitude for it, much to the chagrin of my French teacher who wanted to send me to the governor's school. But then I applied to the Savannah College of Art and Design, and I got in there. But it was way cheaper to just go to school in state. So I went to theater school at VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. And, somehow I bamboozled them into letting me in. And I kept getting cast in play after play. In fact, that was my first brush with equity in college, was when they stopped casting me in order to give other people a chance.
They put a quota system on the roles.
He's in too many damn shows. We got to stop casting him. And but then so I got work out in the community and spent about a year and a half in DC, and then I put all my eggs into one basket. Because when I was in DC, that was the first time I had exposure to like real professional theater, and Arena Stage, a Shakespeare theater. DC is a great theater town for those who enjoy the art form. And, whenever I saw an actor that really compelled me, I looked at their bio. And of course, at the big regional houses, you look into the playbills and, someone always has an MFA from somewhere. And the ones from NYU always really compelled me, more so than Juilliard or Yale. We're not going to get into a dick measuring contest over that. But so I went in. It's one of those programs where, they audition something like 1,000 students from across the country. Then they call back 50, and then they offer spots to 18. And I sailed right through. I don't know how I did it. And spent 3 years there. And then I got out in 2009 with my MFA. I'm one of those people that they make fun of that spent a lot of money on a useless degree, 2 of them. But then over the next 10 years or so, I started working regionally first, and then my agents begged me to stay in town. And around 2017, things really began to take off. So I was working off Broadway and on Broadway, which is where you saw me. And that moment was so funny. We're I think halfway through our conversation, you were like, I saw that. I saw you in that. The play that goes wrong, and working in TV and all these things. I'm working with these like stars, and it was funny because I'm just an army brat, who grew up, from humble beginnings. I never thought that I'd be working with people like Jimmy Smits or Nika Noni Rose or any of these kinds of people. Or Scott Bakula was the coolest one for me because I watched Quantum Leap as a kid. Right? Thank you. Who did that? So then things were just really beginning to take off. It was one of those things where you're one job away from the one that's going to, put you over. And that's when everything shut down. And it was funny because for the first few months, for those who haven't heard this story, for the first few months of 2020, I was all on board. I was all in on the COVIDian cult. And I was wiping down my mail and my groceries. It's like, do you need to really wipe down a box of Fruity Pebbles? Like, I don't think you need to be doing that. But I did it. I'm sure my roommate at the time thought I was insane. I'm wearing a mask, my little hazmat suit. I'm obsessively sanitizing every nook and cranny of the apartment. And, but then around March or so, when everything did shut down, I was like, okay, this is, the right, I don't know if I thought it was the right thing to do, but I'm glad someone is doing something. I think a lot of people felt that way. Like, I don't know what needs to happen, but I'm so afraid that somebody needs to be seen doing something. But about a month later, I began to say, this stuff doesn't make sense. Like there was a headline in the New York Times, there was the death toll from COVID rises to over 10,000 deaths after 3,000 are added. And it was like, they were presumed COVID deaths. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Did you even test them? Do we know that it was actually the virus that killed them? And from there, once you begin pulling on these threads, then other things kind of began to fall away. Our numbers are falling, but the restrictions are getting more harsh. I knew that we'd never had a successful coronavirus vaccine for ever, and yet here we are being told to lock down. And it just seemed like everything we were being told to do to mitigate the spread just made life worse and didn't really do anything. And of course, in the entertainment industry, and I hate to say this, but it's just like you have people who have this really toxic combination of high neuroses, even higher emotionality, and correspondingly low intellect. So it's really these people were just sort of like losing their minds, and everything, and everything that the Democrats did, it became this weird partisan issue where ironically, it was the Republicans and the conservatives who were saying there's something happening in China. But if you said that, then you were a racist xenophobe, which is, I love the idea that it's racist and xenophobic to suggest that the virus leaked from a lab somewhere, but not so to say that all these crazy, savage, slanted-eyed Chinese people eating this crazy food at the wet market or whatever, that's what, everything was just so backwards, and everything was the inverse of what the reality really was. But then what I really became disturbed by is that nobody was really saying anything. Everyone was sort of going along with it. I loved your presentation about Ron Paul, about, just dissidence and speaking up about things. And I was like, no one thinks this is kind of weird. And then, the vaccine mandates came down, and I was like, I'm not taking it. I already had the damn disease. Why do I have to take something for a disease I've already had and already cleared? And there were already studies out and lots of data about the robustness and longevity of natural immunity, all these things. And, me, I never had any sort of axe to grind against vaccines in general. Although now I have friends who are diehard anti-vaxxers who are like, oh no, man, it's all of them. So I'm like, all right, if you say so. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole myself, but it was the principle of the thing. It was nonsensical. And, I came up with this term, and people, might find it shocking, but I came up with this term called niggerize. That's what they did to people who didn't take the shot. And to watch all these people who just months before were all about, Black Lives Matter and anti-racism and, were uplifting Black voices. Then they passed these mandates which disproportionately affected people who look like me and the way they treated people, not allowing them into restaurants and into their own facilities. There were actors who were saying, I don't even want to perform for a single unvaccinated person. And, those videos from Patti LuPone going around saying, put your mask on, these kinds of things. And they're still stuck in that, by the way. 4 or 5 years removed from it, they're still convinced that it was the plague. I think there are a lot of injured people walking around that aren't allowed to say anything, or they aren't making the connection between it. But it was a very hysterical time, and they destroyed lives, and they still have not recovered from their hysteria from that period. other live performance arts, from live music to, pro wrestling and combat sports and professional sports, are doing okay. They're thriving even. But the theater and the opera and other like sort of fine arts who went all in on the hysteria are still limping along right now. So in a way, it's sort of karmic retribution, I think, for what they did. But that's a really long-winded way of answering your question.
No, that's a great way of answering the question. That's a great intro to everything that happened. I want to let everybody know, I think people in the room already know, that this will be a somewhat abbreviated, like 30-ish minute Tom Woods Show episode, because we want to preserve Clifton's voice for the performance later this week. So if you have dinner with Clifton tonight and there's a lot of ambient noise in the dining room and he has to shout over it to be heard, don't have your feelings hurt if he's only talking to the people immediately next to him. So, I subscribe to your Substack, and I just love the state of the arts. That's a brilliant name for Substack. And your most recent post has to do, in effect, with stardom and how it ain't what it used to be, and that social media and technology has eroded it, but also the attitudes and behavior of the stars themselves have eroded it. So I know you could riff on that forever, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the main conclusion that I came to about that, I think of stars of the past, and before they were famous, many of them were sort of the people. Before they became famous, and then sort of became above the people. But you're talking about people who their parents were middle class or working class. They're preachers or doctors or teachers. Some of these people served in the military. They had all kinds of regular jobs, and but now it's very much sort of a pseudo aristocracy of people. And so the conclusion that I came to is that in the past, at their best, these stars, with exceptions like a Jane Fonda or something, were people who kind of brought you together through the force of their talent and whatever magic they had to share. But now the stars of today are agents of deliberate division and social disintegration. And that's, I think, why people react against them so badly, because they disdain the very public that they're meant to serve. Last night at dinner, we were talking about, I went on this rant, and that's why I'm sort of exhausted today, but I went on this rant about, how these actors now, they're pressured both internally and externally to use their voices and use their platforms to say something or do something. And I suspect that part of it is because they don't feel like what they are is enough. Because when you think about it, when you have, acting really, it's a lottery. We're all at the casino. And the way that I explained this, Stella Adler, who was Marlon Brando's teacher, said that she had students in her class who were even more gifted than Marlon Brando, who's widely considered one of the greatest actors who ever lived. But they just didn't have the breaks that Marlon did. And so there are people who are, might be serving you dinner tonight who are just geniuses on stage or screen, while there are also mediocrities who, have entire careers and even awards. So it's not a fair industry. It doesn't really reward merit as much as you would like an industry to. So when you have someone who becomes a mega star, it's it's like winning the lottery in a lot of ways. And I think deep down, a lot of these people feel like, Brando said it himself, back in the 70s or whatever. It's like, what does acting do? And for me, my attitude is, look, I'm not, I'm happy to be that person where, you had a rough day at work, or, you're out with your friends on the weekend, or your girlfriend or your wife, and you just want to kind of chill out and watch something and be moved or laugh or be thrilled somehow, some way. And like, that's the service that I provide. The art heals or addresses wounds that you can't see. There's a spiritual sort of healing there, catharsis, if you will. Even just a simple laugh, laughter is medicine. That's fine. It's fine just to be that. I don't need to change the world as people want to do. I don't need to go across the world and give my Oscar to a Ukrainian president. Yeah. To prove that I'm worth something. It's really fine, to just be entertaining and be an entertainer and embrace that role. I don't see people saying, Denzel Washington should, go and be something more than he is. He's brilliant. He doesn't need to be. And, I think that the the artist serves a very specific role in society, and there just aren't a lot of people, especially actors. I mean, look, our intellect is not our strong suit. You just STFU, just chill out and allow yourself to just be pretty and have people look at you and tell you you're special, and enjoy your life. You don't have to be any kind of an activist. But what they're doing now is that they're so disconnected from the average person and from the majority. Basically, the majority of the country feels one way, but there's a minority of these sort of progressives who are clustered into this one industry, into lots of the cultural industries. And they're heading in one direction while everyone else is either staying still or going in the other direction. And I just don't see how you sustain that for very long. I think one of the fallout that you see is that now, I think more than ever, people are saying, I don't care what these celebrities think or what these stars think or what these actors think. And I'm just going to go and play video games or listen to the Tom Woods show or read a Substack or something. And I'll tune these people out. And, there's cultural issues as well. I mean, I think stars of the past, they came from a culture where they were raised by people who had grit and had to struggle for things. The industry was different. You didn't go to get a BFA or an MFA and work your way into the industry. You swept floors at the theater, or you did an internship or something, or you worked in the mailroom or something. Like, you had to work your way into the industry, as opposed to now, there's Nepo babies and, you get a degree or something. I mean, academia in a way has changed the culture in many of the same ways, I think, as it's changed other aspects of society. So, I mean, it's a really, really long and complicated issue, but, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's a good answer. Hey, everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you're getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you're a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. What if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking? Use your website as a lead generation engine. What if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO Expert Search Engine Optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. I do want to actually ask you a little bit about a topic we've discussed quite a bit, and that, of course, is the person of Thomas Sowell.
Yes.
Because obviously that is a topic very close to you because you're working on a one-man show pertaining to Sowell. And I presume practically everybody listening to this knows who Thomas Sowell was, an extremely prolific author and academic who wrote on economics, but many other topics. I mentioned the Slow Talking Children book last time we were talking, because he had a slow talking child, and it was the most Thomas Sowell thing in the world to then write a book on slow talking children. So what do you think it is, though, about him? He too, you would call him a dissident academically, and he was called all kinds of names. But what is it about his life that necessarily could lend itself to the stage, per se?
When I think of, I have a couple of working titles for the play. It's not going to be like, the Thomas Sowell story, which is, right, kind of boring to me. But, I think of words like iconoclast and radical. For me, when I discovered Sowell, I was also going through a period where I was having this ideological shift. The things that I thought were true turned out to kind of be nonsense. And, I think he turned up in my YouTube feed once. I think it was his appearance on the Bill Buckley show. And I was like, who is this guy with this perfect afro and this beautiful skin, who's just like, an ill-fitting suit, just laying into all these talking points that I've heard all of my life. And shortly after that, I picked up basic economics and white rednecks and black liberals, and they completely sort of revolutionized the way that I see the world. So I thought that his story was compelling to me because as somebody who began his life spent the first, third of his life as this Marxist radical. There's a quote in his memoir, A Personal Odyssey, that apparently Milton Friedman, who was one of his teachers, said to George Stigler, another of his teachers, that he's a socialist, but he's too smart to remain one for long. But also, this is a guy who, even when he's, the Chicago School of Economics, even back then, had this conservative reputation. And at that time, he was a Marxist, but he would be going toe-to-toe intellectually with guys like Stigler, who, was already established and would go on to win these Nobel Prizes. And so there is this sense that that he has his opinion and his view, and he's not going to back down. But even when he was he had more of a leftist bent, he writes that, I was still, reading Edmund Burke, and I was still, reading these conservative authors. So he always had this sort of scientific and all-encompassing mind, and this hunger, I think, to develop his mind and to chase down ideas. And that hunger, I think, is what is really attractive to me about him as far as bringing him to the stage. It comes out in his writing, but I think when you see, him in interviews, he can get some fiery sometimes, but I think there is a huge, almost a fury. There's a passion, a drive, a rage in him, and an aggression. He's able to use his intellect as a shield and as a weapon. And that to me is so fascinating, and especially when you consider that someone who is of his skin color, coming at a time where, from 1930 to 1964 or so, he worked his way through the world. He talks about how, even as a young economist, he was getting published in prestigious journals, and he felt he got more automatic respect as a black man than after all the civil rights upheavals. And so he has a really interesting relationship with race in terms of, at the beginning, he was more on the radical side of like, this is a guy who's been kicked out of restaurants, for being the wrong skin color. But he's saying, the sit-ins are amazing. We do this, we do that. But also you read his letters and he was having second thoughts about that. Like, is this the right way to go about things? So he kind of was at odds already with this, what he became to call the civil rights establishment. But then there's these sort of placating, condescending white liberals at the same time who we can see actively doing damage to his people. And at the same time, he's also honest in saying, like, look, we have problems internally within our communities and culturally that need to be addressed. So, and he's saying these things out loud and writing them down. And so he's not a very popular person to many, many people. But then there's this other attitude about him, which is like, he goes, well, I don't care. He just does not care. And that, to me, is also a very compelling aspect of him and his personality that makes him a very attractive figure, as someone who is just that independent, courageous, full of integrity, full of honesty and intelligence. Friedman called him a genius. That's pretty high praise. There's just so many aspects of him that are just fascinating to me. And fascinating to anyone who knows him. So it's a big undertaking to bring him to life. And, you have to sort of focus and winnow down to make a compelling dramatic piece. But just as a personality, there's so much meat there that, you don't know where to bite into.
You mentioned his letters. Are these publicly available or did you come across them?
No, there's a book called A Man of Letters, which he published. And it's his private correspondences between friends and colleagues from the 1960s to, I believe, up to about 2000. And from an acting perspective or a dramaturgical perspective, it's really interesting to sort of, as I develop my point of view about him, to see how his mind changes, to see the bluntness and frankness with which he tackles certain issues, to see his frustrations, and even some of the personal, like there's some woman that he calls Audrey that he was hooked on like his entire life. They were going to get married and then they didn't. There's interesting things about his marriage and how that broke down, his first marriage, that is. And, even other aspects of his personal life about like how dedicated he was as a father to keeping his family together. and protecting them from his ex-wife and these kinds of things. So it really humanizes him in a way that you don't really get just watching his interviews or lectures.
What's the state of the project right now?
State of the project is in reset mode. So I spent the last year, we started off the momentum with the crowdfunding campaign, which went really, really well. But then I was like, okay, well, now I have to stay active on Twitter, and then I have to, do my newsletter, and people are asking me to do audiobooks and do this and do that. And I'm trying to revive my acting career, which, I'm on the list now, so I can't do that. It's true. So I got really, really distracted. And now I'm like, okay, let me reset, let me refresh, go back to the beginning. So I have a plan laid out about, research and development and then workshopping. So the plan is to get it on its feet by the end of the year. That is the goal. It's the most important thing in my life. And that is what needs to happen.
My friends, we're all on the spectrum, the risk spectrum, that is. Some of us play it safe while others are ready to bet half their income on red on a Las Vegas roulette wheel. But I am willing to take some risks in exchange for being able to live on my own terms. For still others, even the prospect of not receiving a regular paycheck from an employer is too much to bear. There's no right or wrong here. It's a matter of what you're comfortable with. And that's why the franchise option can be a happy medium between the extremes. Yes, you're going out on your own, but you're not entirely on your own. With a franchise, you've got existing branding, existing products and services, and existing formulas all ready to go for you. A friend I know from the libertarian world has set up a system that you can use to narrow down all the franchise possibilities out there to one that will work best for you, given your goals and interests. He's just published a free guide to franchising that is well worth the read. Get your free copy at tomwoods.com/franchise.
So you've obviously your life and career took a turn that nobody could have anticipated, nobody wanted. But at the same time, and I don't mean to say that this makes it better. It does. Nothing can excuse what was done to you. But you've had a chance to meet a lot of people you probably wouldn't have met otherwise and get to know people. So as you look back on it, are there people or publications or anything that you've been exposed to that makes you say, I want my career back, but I'm glad I met so-and-so?
It's been very difficult because, I did my first play when I was 16, and that's all I did for 20 years. And to this day, I don't watch anything made after 2020. And I struggle daily. Even the idea of trying to, I was told I could work my way off the blacklist, but then that would involve me trying to sort of lower myself to appease people that, A, whom I have no real respect for, and B, like I said before, they were niggerizing people like me for essentially being correct. I love this Thomas Sowell quote about, he says that people will forgive you for being wrong, but they'll never forgive you for being right, especially when your being right proves them wrong. And also, I think to myself, well, I have to censor myself now, and to get myself back in these good graces, and I hate doing that. I really hate doing that. And it's difficult for me, if I'm being really open, to not dwell on that and become very bitter and very resentful about it. On the other hand, though, I've also had people reach out to me from within the industry who said, well, maybe your way is the way. They heard about the Thomas Sowell campaign and the way that went. And I see that, it's not lost on me that, before I had this old Twitter account where I was like, the standard sort of actor Twitter account. It's like, come see me in shows, guys. I'm doing this on, and no one cared about that.
Yeah.
And then I have my private Twitter, which was anonymous, where I was really sharing my true opinions. But in 2020, things were getting so insane that I began speaking up publicly. And it's not lost on me that in the span of, 3 to 5 years, my following just exploded when I just began saying what I actually think. And, now I find myself in places like, on a cruise ship in the Caribbean and meeting Tom Woods, or, I love that you shouted out Jay Bhattacharya, who's a mutual friend of ours. And, I'm so happy for him, what's happened for him. I've got people like Douglas Murray and others that are like, I could text them and call them up and be like, hey, what's going on? So I'm meeting all these really fascinating people and carving out a new life for myself that is full of unknowns and that's really unpredictable. And, if I can't say that, oh, well, I want to be able to be that person who says, well, the fact that I'm being barred from entry now is a method of protection, because really the ship is sinking in many, many ways. And I do miss it. But at the same time, I woke up this morning and I'm looking out at the water and the sunlight and part of the reason I'm so exhausted today vocally is because, I made contact with so many really sharp and interesting people. So I think it's just a long-winded way of me saying that, it's not easy. It's not always fun, but I also wonder if things are more interesting now and more fulfilling because, just listening to your presentation on Ron Paul and listening to people debate about various aspects of economics and taxes and policy and everything. What other actors are doing this right now? You know what I mean? And I always say it's always fun to be the dumbest person in the room. And I get to be that person all the time now. So, and as someone who, for whatever reason, is always interested and fascinated by ideas and compelled by ideas and intellectual pursuits, that probably is the greatest gift. And, I'm developing other skills, business and marketing and these kinds of things, which, I didn't really have to worry about because they were all taken care of for me by this whole machine. So now in terms of, maybe I'm my own dissident artist or whatever, and people look up to me as some kind of, I would say thought leader, but I think it's really funny because, there was someone who was like, you're one of my favorite thinkers. I'm like, first of all, no, I'm just not, if we're looking up at actors for thinking that, we're in a very bad place, and I would never consider myself in that realm. I'm not an intellectual, I'm an artist, and that's where I place my priority. But I will say that it's a far more interesting and fulfilling life that's full of learning and ideas. And I think, all my favorite artists, whether you're talking about comedians or even magicians or writers, they're philosophers and thinkers in some way, shape, or form. And I do wonder if all of this is the universe being like, okay, I'm just going to put you in places where you're learning all the time. You're learning something new or hearing something that you've never heard before. And whatever that means down the road for you, that's what it's going to be. So yeah, I miss it. I can't lie. But at the same time, things have gotten really, really interesting. And there's something sort of, I think, fascinating and unpredictable that is growing in its place.
Well, I want to keep my pledge to you, so I'll wrap things up now, but I want to wrap them up by saying a couple things. First of all, I think I pay for 2 people's Substack, you and one other guy. So I pay to read what you write. I don't even know if I need to, maybe I could get it all I didn't even look at the terms of it, but that's very rare. And I know you're not primarily a writer, but you write well, and I know you know that. You write well. When I used to be a professor and I would see these papers coming in, and I was shocked that these students can't communicate at all on any level. And what's worse is that some of them thought they were good writers, but you actually are a good writer. So I understand how you feel about actors who think they're going to fix all the world's problems with 3 slogans. And I hear that too. But number one, I feel like you're in a separate category. But number 2, that fundraising, the crowdfunding you did for the Sowell Project did so well despite the absence of any institutional support. So that it wasn't like the Daily Caller told everybody to go support you. They don't even know what's going on in the world, so that they didn't do anything. But it was the people who discovered you and knew your story and wanted to support this. So when that guy said to you, maybe your way is the way, maybe there is something bubbling beneath the surface out there. We're just waiting for it to actually erupt.
And, first of all, I appreciate that. And because I actually do really enjoy writing. And, I make a habit every morning to sit down for 2 to 3 hours, because it's so funny, talking to you who, it's just, just putting out books all the time and just writing. Like, I got to work at, Tom Woods' level. That industriousness is ridiculous. But I do enjoy it, and I hope to keep improving, and so I appreciate that. But I was mentioning this earlier. I do think that culture right now and pop culture, it's up for grabs right now in a way that it hasn't been in a very long time. And one of my frustrations is that, the people who are primarily responsible for like the artistic output and the cultural output in this country, they've really lost the plot. And it's not just sort of, this sort of right-wing railing against, the decline in aesthetics or, ugly architecture or something, or profane rap music. I mean, there was an article in the New York Times in 2023 by one of their main art critics about, it's like 5,000 words on why ours is the least innovative century in the arts in the past 500 years. So everyone knows that there's a problem. And I think what's interesting is that even though I think these institutions are imploding and declining, they're self-immolating, really. I do think slowly but surely there are people on the outside who are like in cities like Nashville, for instance, is one place where there's a lot of ex-New Yorkers, lots of ex-Broadway talent who are trying to build something new out there and doing some really interesting things. So there is sort of a maverick spirit that's arising among certain people from outside the system who are saying like, okay, we need something new. And I agree with you. I think there's this huge untapped market of people who are just dying for cultural enrichment, not in the cynical way that's used, by some people on the right, but just great art, great music, great drama, great literature, all these kinds of things. They're looking for something that's aspirational and beautiful, however you define that, and enriching and enlightening. And I think the success of the Sowell campaign was amazing, not just because, it was for me or even for Dr. Sowell, but it was people paying to see theater at a time when theaters are failing. And that is not lost on me either. And, I think part of my job now as a semi-public figure or whatever is to try to communicate to people the value of the arts and culture and the value in supporting them, because I find there's so many people who are really interested in it. But they don't want to support, the latest woke garbage or whatever. So, there's things that are percolating and bubbling and simmering underneath the surface. And I think there's a lot of demand, pent up demand, as you were saying earlier, for a renaissance. It's just a matter of, can we get all the elements needed into place to help that renaissance come forth?
How do people follow you?
Well, you can find me on Substack. I'm at the State of the Arts. I appreciate the shout out to the name. I'm on Twitter at I'm calling it Twitter. I'm not calling it X.
Okay, good for you, man. Somebody's got to keep the faith here.
I can't do it, man. It's ridiculous. But I'm on Twitter at Clifton A. Duncan. I have a YouTube channel, which is Clifton Duncan as well. And then my Instagram is Clifton Duncan Online. So you can find me through all those methods. And that, I think, is all the important information.
Clifton, thanks a million. I'm so glad to have you here.
Always a pleasure, Tom.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.